Hello, everyone, and welcome. In this session, we're going to build a web app together. We're going to containerize it, and don't worry if you're not sure what that means. We'll explain it. And we're going to deploy it to the cloud. And I think you'll see as we go along how easy it is, and that's one of the things I love about our cloud platform. My name is Marc Cohen. I'm a developer advocate. You can find my blog at mco.dev. And on Twitter, my handle is mco_dev. And let's go to the workshop. So I have one more link for you, g.co/codelabs/dev2prod. So one more time, that's g.co/codelabs, CODELABS/dev2prod, DEV2PROD. So if you go there, you will see something that looks a lot like the window on the left. And this arrangement you see here is what we're going to use for the entire lab. What's on the left is the code lab that you should see. And what's on the right of the screen is the cloud console. So I'll be able to kind of go back and forth without changing windows today. I invite you to set up something similar to that, but whatever you're comfortable with is fine. So let's get into it. First of all, I want to just give you some background about application deployment. And the key here to think about is if you have a good application and you want to deploy it nowadays, there are a ton of different things you have to worry about, like provisioning hardware, installing software, security patching, the economics of it, scaling up and down, and so on. It gets really complex. And most of those things are really having to do with infrastructure. They don't have to do with your application business logic. And what I really want to concentrate on when I'm writing an app is just solving my problem. I don't want to do all that other stuff. And so what I'm going to illustrate for you today is a way to let Google take care of all the infrastructure for you so that you can just focus all your attention on your application. So let's get set up. What we're going to do is create a project. So you're going to go to the Cloud Console. That's console.cloud.google.com. And you're going to create a new project. And you can do that by selecting this pull down up at the top here and click this New Project button. This will prompt you for a project name, a billing account. And in this billing account pull down, that's where you can select the free trial account that you just created if you're using the credits. And then you'll click Create. I'm not going to do that right now because I have a project I'm going to use that I've already set up. But that's what you'll want to do. If you don't have a project you already want to use, if not, you can reuse your project. The next step is we're going to start the Cloud Shell. So the Cloud Shell is this little widget in the upper right-hand corner. If you hover over it, it says Activate Cloud Shell. So go ahead and click on that. And you'll get this window or this tab popping up at the bottom of your screen saying provisioning your Cloud Shell machine. Let me make this bigger for you. And what this is doing is giving you a login and an interactive command processor on a virtual machine that was allocated for you. So it's all ready to go, and you already have a development place in the cloud, essentially. To make this more visible, I'm going to change my prompt. Give me a little more room to type on the screen here. Okay, so that's your Cloud Shell environment. And you're going to probably have everything pre-set up the way you want. But just in case, you'll want to make sure that your project is set. So you'll run this command, gcloud config list project. And you should see it displaying the project that you've just created or that you're reusing. And if you've got that set up, you can also say gcloud auth list, as shown here, and that will essentially tell you your account is set correctly and you're authenticated, rather. So you want to do that as well. And if the project's not set correctly, by the way, you can do this command, gcloud config set project, and then type whatever your project is. But you should be okay with it by default. I also want you to copy paste these environment variable settings. This is setting the project number, the project name in a short variable that we'll use later, the app name, the port name, a default region, and something called tag, which we'll use when we containerize your app. Last thing on this, in this getting set up stage, is we're going to enable 3 services that we need to use. So you'll paste those. And by the way, when you hit the first command in Cloud Shell that requires authorization, you'll get this little pop-up that says Authorize Cloud Shell. Go ahead and click Authorize there. And we're setting up Cloud Build, which will enable us to build our project in the cloud, Container Registry to store our container, and the Cloud Run service. So once you've got those enabled, let's go to the next step, which is we're going to build our app. Now, this is going to be a simple app, but that's fine. We want a vehicle that's not too complicated that we can use to then see it run locally, or at least running in this development environment, and then we're going to deploy it to the cloud. So what I want you to do next is click this Open Editor button that I'm hovering over right here. And what that will do is it will create essentially an integrated development environment in the same window. So now you'll have a terminal, an IDE, and the Cloud Console. And what I like to do here is, if you look at this bar that I'm hovering on, you can slide it up as far as you want, and that gives you a little bit more screen real estate for your terminal and shell. And you can sort of go back and forth between the editor and the terminal. Sorry, I'm using different terms there. The editor and the terminal, I'll try to use those words consistently. You can ping pong back and forth by clicking these buttons. And then you always have the Cloud Console up here. You can pull this down if you need to do more work up there. So I find this to be a convenient setup for getting things done in one combined window. So let's build our app. The first thing we're going to do is to create a folder for the app, and let's call this folder Hello. So we'll pull down File, New Folder, enter the name Hello. You can actually call it anything you want, but I'm going to give it that name. Here, do a little cleanup here. Next, you're going to want to create a new file, and if you do that, it'll put it in that folder automatically. I think I managed to put hello under test, which isn't going to bother me, but you'll hopefully get the hello folder created at the top level. So you're going to do the create new file, and the name of the file is going to be requirements.txt. That's a plural, requirements.txt. That's under hello, which is where we wanted it to be. And we're going to put these 2 words in there, Flask and GUnicorn. Now, for Python people, you'll know what this is, but if you're new to this, requirements.txt is a conventional place to put the required packages for Python programs. So once we've done that, we're going to create the first version of our app. And I'm just going to copy paste this code under version 1 Hello World. I'm going to create a new file, call it main.py. I can type it. And we'll paste that code in there. Let's take a real quick look. This is using the Flask package, creating an app, getting a port number from the environment variable we set earlier. This route is telling it to support this say hello function for any incoming web requests that are directed to the root of the URL, or the root path, you might call it. And that come in with an HTTP GET request. And all this is going to do, this function, is set a variable called HTML to this very trivial HTML document that says hello world and returns that, which will essentially get it to percolate out to the web browser. So the next thing we're going to do is go back to the terminal. And you may wonder about why I didn't have you save it. These files will auto-save in the editor. So I'm back to the terminal, And as I mentioned earlier, I accidentally put the hello directory under test. And in fact, hello is, yeah. So for me, I had to, just to repeat that, I had to cd test hello to get to the stuff I wanted. For you, you should just see hello and you'll be able to just say cd hello. So hopefully I'm the only person with that glitch. Now I've got my requirements.txt, and what I want to do is install the requirements, and I'll do that by saying pip3 install -r requirements.txt, and that's already finished. And next I'll run my sample app. So with those two files, I have a very simple web app. I'm going to run it by saying python3 main.py. And what I can do now is click this web preview button. If you click there, you'll see a preview on port 8080. And if you do that, it should take you to your app. And there you go. You have your very sophisticated web app that says hello world. So you can hopefully see that working for yourself. We're going to tweak the app just a little bit, and I'm going to actually skip version 2 and go to version 3 because they're just basically adding a little bit of successive functionality, and I don't think there's huge value right now in doing each step one at a time. So we're going to kind of jump to the end of this portion of the lab. So what I'd like you to do is go back to main.py. I'm going to wipe out what I had there. Now, when you do this on your own, you can actually make the changes piecemeal, because I've annotated this lab to say, this line here is new, this line is modified, so you can see the exact changes. But for expedience, I'm just going to select this whole version 3. I'm going to paste it into main.py. And just to give you a sense of what this is about, I've modified it so that it takes a portion of the URL, and if it exists, meaning if there's something coming after the slash in the URL, it will echo that back instead of world. So if I have slash Google I/O, it'll say hello Google I/O. And then the other thing is it's playing around with the background color for the stuff that it presents. So let's go ahead back to the terminal. If you enter Control-C, it should break out of the existing app that was running. And let's go back to run Python3 again, Python3 space main.py. And we'll do the same thing we did as before. We'll open the previewer to port 8080, and there we see the app with a random background color. The other thing I wanted to mention is, as I said earlier, you can change the little bit after the slash to anything you'd like, and you get hello Google I/O. So we've kind of tweaked the app a little bit, and I hope that gives you a sense that you've got a pretty straightforward development environment with both a terminal and an editor embedded right here into the Cloud Console. So hopefully you've got that working. We'll go on to the next step, which is to containerize the app. Now, I want to take just a minute to explain what containerizing means. If you imagine taking this app and sharing it with someone, they would need to make sure they had all of the things you have in your environment. And the environment can encompass a lot of things, right? One way to improve that problem is to give them your requirements.txt. But there's some issues there. For example, I didn't specify a particular version of Flask or GUnicorn. And let's imagine someone installs this on their system and they have a different version of Flask or GUnicorn, or those packages change and the most recent version works differently. On top of that, the operating system might have some quirks. They might be using a different version of Python. There's all sorts of possible ways that someone who takes this code could run into problems. And wouldn't it be nice if we could package up everything this app needs, all of its dependencies, into one kind of modular bubble? And that's what a container essentially is. It lets you define everything you need to run this app anywhere. The way you specify a container is through something called a Docker file. So I want you to create a new file again called Docker file with a capital D. You're going to copy this text into there, and I'll just briefly walk through what this is doing. Think of a Docker file as a blueprint for a container. So it starts with a from line, which says this is the base, and that's a prepackaged kind of foundation for your container. We're going to tell it the working directory. That's where we're going to do everything. It's kind of the home directory for the container. It's /app in this case. We're going to copy our two files, main.py and requirements.txt. We'll install the requirements as we're building the container. We're going to set the port number. And then here's the command to run when you start the container. And with that, we can build the container. And we're going to do that using the cloud. There are ways to do this locally using the Docker command. But I'm going to switch back to the terminal, Control-C out of my running Python app. And I'm going to do this gcloud builds submit ---- tag. Now the tag is really just giving the resulting container image a unique name in a namespace so that you can then refer to the container later when you want to run it in the cloud or locally. So this takes a minute or so, but what's happening here is it's both building the container and it's pushing it to a repository so we can refer to it later. So now we have the container built. We can say gcloud container images list if we want to actually see all the containers we've built. And here's the one I just made, gcr.io, that's the container repository or registry, I think. mco cloud run is my project, and hello is the app. So that container has the app in it and it's ready to run. Now, before I go to the cloud, let's just run that container locally, which we can do, and just test that the container works exactly like the app did when I ran it with Python main.py, Python3 main.py. I'm giving a couple arguments for something called port mapping, and that's to map the port from the host system from my MacBook into the internal port in the container's kind of view of the world. And I end the command with $tag. And again, that's how I tell Docker, that's the image that I want you to run. It said unable to find image because it didn't see a copy of it locally. So it pulled it from the container registry. And now it should be running, although I was expecting to see a little bit more. Let's go ahead and see if it's running. And yeah, it is running. So you can see that it's looking exactly like it was when I ran it locally. And just to prove it's actually running, I'm going to cancel out of it, go back here, and refresh the screen. And you see I couldn't connect to server on port 8080. So just to review what we've done, we built an app, we ran it locally, and then we containerized it. And by doing so, we now have this module I can give to anyone and be confident that app is going to run exactly for them the same way it did for me, which is super powerful. Okay, now what do we want to do next? Imagine we've built this app. It's a great app and we want to share it with the world. Well, we don't want to give people the container and tell them to run a container. We want to just deploy it on the web and have people be able to visit a website and experience the app. So we really want to send this app or deploy it in the cloud. Now, one of the great things about the product I'm going to be using to deploy it, which is called Cloud Run, is that it's going to give you all of that administrative stuff that I talked about at the beginning, all of that infrastructure. It's going to give you that for free. It's going to give you very good reliability and availability. It's going to scale automatically. It's going to minimize your costs because you're only going to pay for when the app is actually running. It's going to give you the ability to, in one easy step, to add a custom domain name. It's going to give you security with standard SSL, TLS, HTTPS type encryption. And as you're going to see, it gives you very good response time. So how do we do that? Well, let's go back to the cloud editor. let's go to our main.py file. And where it says name equals world, instead of world, we're going to say from Cloud Run. So when we run this on Cloud Run, we should see a slightly different message, hello from Cloud Run. Now that we've made that very small source change, let's go ahead and run it. Now this lab says to do a build submit, but we've already done that. So we actually can skip that step and we should be able to just run this command. So let's go back to the terminal. Let me bring this up here. And we're going to run the deploy command. Now what this deploy is saying is the name of my app is hello. That's the $app variable that we set. The image I want you to use is $tag. We've set that as well and been using that when we build. I want the managed platform, which is, there's another way you can use Cloud Run where you have, you can sort of use your own cloud, you can sort of use your own lower level infrastructure, but we're going to use the higher abstraction level and request this managed platform. You can specify the region and allow unauthenticated. This part right here is basically saying, I want anybody to be able to access this website. They don't need to log in. And you can see I talked a lot longer than it took for it to deploy this app. It's actually all ready to go. Now, we can't just do the local preview here because it's actually been assigned a globally accessible URL. But we can just click on this URL to see it, and there's our app once again. But now it's running in the cloud, so if we send a lot of traffic to it, and we will later, we can see that it'll automatically scale to meet the offered demand. So that's how easy it was to take an app that was in development, to containerize it, and to run it on the cloud. Now, as easy as that was, I still had to think about this notion of a Docker file, and I had to come up with that blueprint in order to figure out, how to build the container image. Wouldn't it be nice if I didn't have to do that? And that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do using something called build packs. So I want you to go back to the editor again, and we're going to once again change the message. Oh, I forgot to point out earlier that the message said from Cloud Run, which showed us we were actually getting that version of the app. But now we're going to change it from saying from Cloud Run to saying from Cloud Run with build packs. And in order to use build packs, we have to add one more file. So under hello, we're going to say new file, and we're going to create a file called proc file, Procfile with a capital P. So go ahead and create that now. And all that has to be in this file is this one line, web, telling it's a web app, Python 3 is the environment, and starting up the app so this is really giving it the equivalent of how do I start the container, and it's simply Python 3 main.py, which we've been using all along. Now with this one line and a slightly different deployment command, I'm going to get the system to build the Docker file and create the image for me without me having to work out what the Docker file should look like. So what I'm going to do is actually delete this file. Now the Docker file is gone. And if I go back to the terminal and do an ls, you can see there's my proc file, but there's no longer a Docker file. And so now I'm going to build the same service and let the system figure out how to make the container for me. Now that's going to take a little bit longer because it has to do a build, but let me just explain what's different. Instead of giving an image with a tag, I didn't have to do that. You'll notice there's no $tag appearing in this command, but there's this new argument --source dot. And dot in Linux and Unix derived systems is a shorthand for the current directory. So this is telling gcloud, all of the source for my app lives right in this directory. And I didn't give you a tag, but I put a proc file on there to tell you the minimum I need to tell you. Create the container for me. Build it, deposit it in the container repository, and deploy it all in one command. So now I've gotten to the point where I don't even have to think about a Docker file, what it is, how to code it. I can just, again, create my app and deploy it to the cloud. It just makes everything easier for me as a developer. As I said, this takes a bit longer. So what I might do is jump ahead to the next step of the lab, and we'll keep an eye on this window in the meantime. So do you have to use the command line? Obviously, I'm doing everything in this lab via the command line. And I'm going to just increase the size here so it's a little easier to see. And the short answer is no, you don't have to use the command line. I used it in this lab because it's easy to show and it's easy to reproduce and copy things. But there's 3 different ways to use the Google Cloud. One is through the command line that we've seen a lot of. Another is through the web interface, which is up here at the top of the screen. And the last is programmatically, so you can use any of a number of supported client libraries as well. So with that in mind, I do just want to show you quickly what the web portion looks like. By the way, this finished building, I think, yes, and it's now deploying and it's done. So we get another URL here, and it's not going to look too much different, except that now it says with build packs. So this is telling us it got our new version. And so we were able to deploy this version without even thinking about a Docker file straight to the cloud with all these nice benefits. So what I wanted to show you here is what the web version of all this looks like. So you have this project up here, and you can go to, with the navigation menu on the upper left, you can go to the Cloud Run page. And you'll see all of your services. So here's the one I just deployed. It's called Hello. And if you go to the revisions tag, you can see the 4 versions that I've deployed. The last one is Hello 0004 VIY, and that's getting 100% of the traffic. You can see your URL here. You can get details about the deployment. Somewhere in here, I can get the specifics about the I think if I click over here, here it is. The image URL is shown over here. So that's the exact container image that we built and stored in the registry. And we can say manage traffic to actually point a different percentage of the incoming traffic at different levels of, or different revisions of our service. And that's really handy if you're wanting to canary, like where you have a new revision and you just want a small percentage of your traffic going there to make sure things are okay before you deploy it more widely. It's also quite handy for A/B testing. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can do here. I didn't even show that you can just create a brand new service from scratch. You can give it a name. You'll give it the container image. You can set some advanced settings, kind of configuring various things like the hardware, how you want the auto scaling to work. You can specify a minimum number of instances and so on. So lots of stuff you can do. Pretty much everything you can do that I showed you from the command line, you can do from the console as well, which is great. And you can also do all that good stuff with client libraries programmatically. So I'll let you read through this later when you do the lab on your own, if you come back to it. Before I have you clean up your work, we're going to test the app. So I want you to go back to the editor/terminal window. We'll slide that up. And we'll go to, actually, I'm at the terminal. If you're in the editor, click the Open Terminal button to go back there. Let me make this bigger and clear the screen. So at the top. Now, the Cloud Shell comes with a bunch of nice capabilities built right in. For example, there's the gcloud command, for example, came automatically installed. And I'm going to use a load test tool called Hey. You can see what that does for yourself. But what we're going to use it for is to run some traffic against the service that I just deployed. So here's the command I'm going to use. I'll paste it in here. Now, the -Q option is telling it how many requests per second. So I'm going to drive this traffic at 1,000 requests per second. -C is how many parallel workers I want. So we'll have 200 parallel, it's not really threads, they're Go routines, because this program was written in the Go language. And the -Z tells how long to run for. I'm going to actually change that to 15 seconds so we're not waiting too long. And the last thing I'm going to do is change the URL. Now, if we go back to our Cloud Run service, we can pick the URL from right here. Click that button, we'll copy it to the clipboard, and then I'll just paste it. I am unable to access this window. So these things happen. I'm going to reload the browser and see if I can make my way back. This page is dead, is officially dead. So let's see if I can resurrect it in a new tab. And if it doesn't work, I'm just going to move on, but let's give it one shot. Okay, so here's my URL, and let's go back to home. Let's make this smaller. So my Cloud Shell is not, there it is, okay. Let's move this up. Oops. Make a nicer prompt, clear the screen. Here's my URL, and now we're going to, whoops, let's turn on command editing. Here's my URL, and let's turn on, or rather, let's do this command. So what we want is hey through the rest of the options. And there we finally have the command I wanted to run, except I said I wanted to do it for 15 seconds. So I just broke out of it so I can do it for less time. I'll change this 30 to 15, and let's let that kind of percolate. What it's going to do is basically hammer on the service I just deployed, and it's going to gather statistics. So let's review what it's telling us. The total amount of data was almost a megabyte. It lasted for a little over 15 seconds, as I specified. The entirely slowest response time was 3/4 of a second. The fastest was 186 milliseconds. On average, it was 287 milliseconds. The request per second was almost 700 per second, which is not too bad. I'd asked for 1,000 per second, but for various reasons, primarily related to the hardware I'm running on right now, I didn't quite get there, but that's not too bad. It shows a histogram, a nice response time distribution, to show you that most of the responses, where we had one kind of outlier here, most of the responses were fairly well behaved at the low end of the scale. And the 95th percentile, for example, was 567 milliseconds. I'll run that one more time. And the key idea here that I want to point out is that if you send a lot of traffic, Cloud Run is just going to automatically expand the amount of resources it's providing in order to enable you to keep up with the demand. So it will grow and it will shrink based on the traffic. And this goes back to my original comment. We're doing the infrastructure work for you. You don't have to worry about allocating resources. It'll just magically happen for you so you can focus on writing your application. This one, pretty similar results. So yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention is back on the Cloud Console, there is a metrics page where you can view I won't go there now, but you can view the servers, the Google Cloud Run version or perspective of all of the statistics. You get graphics about response time, latency, requests per second, errors, all kinds of useful information. So you can compare the client side with the server side and get some good feedback there. So that's really what I wanted you to do with me today. The last thing I want you to be aware of is that when you do an experiment like this, you should always clean up after yourself so that you don't accumulate charges after the fact. So what you can do is run gcloud container images delete $tag. And what that will do is remove your container that you just created from the cloud registry that you stored. Now that didn't work. And the reason is, if you remember, I ran into a problem and I had to restart Cloud Shell. And I lost those environment settings that I did right at the beginning. So if that happens to you, if you have to restart or reload the window in the middle of this lab, you might find things working a little bit erratically, and so or not working at all. And so in that case, you'll want to go back and reset these helper variables. And now I think if I go back and do the deletion command, I can just recall it here. Now it's got $tag and it's saying, are you sure you really want to delete that? And I'll say yes. And the last thing is, I won't do this, but you can delete the services as well, the Cloud Run services that you deployed. And then when you look at them on the Cloud Console, you'll see they're gone. So that's really the lab. I just wanted to summarize what you've learned. You have built a very simple web app, admittedly, but you've containerized it, you've deployed it to production. As we went through this, you hopefully learned a little bit about containers and how to build your own container. You saw that it's nice to know about containers, but you actually didn't even need to know the details in order to, to build a container thanks to the build packs feature. And then you saw how easy it is to deploy this service using both the gcloud command line tool and the console. So now your application can be served with real confidence to anyone in the world with all these great features. And the one question I want to leave you with is, now that you've got your app working in production, how many lines of code did we have to change to modify it from the starting version to the deployed version? And the answer, and it's one of my favorite things, the answer is 0. Okay, I did change the little hello tag to say from Cloud Run or from Cloud Run with build packs, but that was cosmetic. The rest of the code, I literally did not have to touch. And to me, like going from one environment to another, more advanced, more sophisticated environment, without having to think about what that impact is going to be on my code is a great thing. And that's one of the reasons I love using Cloud Run. There's some resources here for you to do more reading. I will just remind you of the link to the code lab. It's g.co/codelabs/dev2prod. And I'm probably finishing a little bit early, but hopefully that was helpful to you. And if I can help you with anything, feel free to reach out to me. Again, it's mco.dev, on Twitter, mco_dev. And to find out more about Cloud Run, go to cloud.google.com/run. And with that, I will thank you for your attention, and I hope you learned something and had a good time.